I think maybe the time change has helped our energy level this morning, because there's a lot more. I know I feel a lot better. This will be the only day I'll feel a lot better. After this, I'll go into deep, dark depression about 4 o'clock every afternoon. But for now, this is good. We got that extra hour. I was able to take advantage of that, and hopefully you did too. So hate to break up the conversation, but let's get ready to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is going to be where we are today. And we're going to cover the whole chapter. Woohoo! And I'm grateful to have this chapter. It seems like the last couple I've had have been a little bit thorny, shall we say. A little bit tricky or obscure, or something that's maybe get sweaty palms before we talk about it. Not this time. I think we're going to be good. We'll see if I can manage to mess that up. Anyway, we're going to look at this chapter here, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm just going to read it through, and then we'll get on to some thoughts, and we'll break it down in our usual pattern here. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide in these three, and the greatest of these is love. Now, why Paul starts with a wedding ceremony in the middle of this whole talk about the church and everything like that is beyond me. I hadn't quite worked that part out. But this is a passage that I suppose is in most wedding ceremonies at some point. That's really not what he's talking about, though, is he? He's talking about the church. And it occurs to me, too, have you ever wondered, what Paul, the person, was like to hang around? If you're going over to dinner at Paul's place, what would that be like? How many of you think you like he's mostly a brain box and you're going to get a lot of heavy philosophical conversation and maybe a bit of a toe stomping? Anybody think that way? Like he's going to be real heavy? I kind of think with this right here, one thing that we might insinuate about Paul and being around Paul is that if Paul isn't like this, he would never get a chance to write it. Nobody would believe it, right? He would be a massive hypocrite. So this must be some kind of reflection of what it was like to be with Paul. And who wants to be with somebody like this? Right? I would rather be with, no, I probably shouldn't. I'd rather be with somebody like this probably than be somebody like this sometimes, right? So let's break this down. I think there's something here that Paul is talking about. As we mentioned before, we're coming off. This falls, I think, between chapter 12 and chapter 14, and it's sort of like the mid part. of the play. Let's say it's a play, you got chapter 12, maybe sets it up, but the 14 kind of ends. This is like the crux of it. This is the connecting piece. You can't really it doesn't make a lot of sense outside of that context, right? So we've been talking about the divisions. We've been talking about, just last week, we talked about how people were, saying their particular talent or gift is better than everybody else's. And he's trying to explain, like, that's not how this works. You got to be working together. This is the body. We get the body image, which is really helpful, right? And even as much as we know that working as a team or working as a body, we might give lip service to these things, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that we actually practice it well. I don't know, the last few years at work, we've gone through so many team building exercises. Team building exercises. We're going to have another one in December. Team building exercises, right? Okay, everybody plays an important part of the team. We all know this. We all say this, but we don't all live it, do we? And I think what Paul is given here is, this is how, in chapter 13, this is how you make those things work. You want to be one body? Here's how you do it. So let's break it down a little bit. If I speak in the tongues of humans and angels, but I do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. So, tongues and angels, of angels and humans. So most of the commentary I read said this is probably hyperbole, right? He's just being hyperbolic. Surely you're not just as worthless as a gong or a cymbal, right? If you have these things. He probably is true. But it also dawned on me, like, speaking in tongues was a real thing. It was a real thing that was happening. And maybe I'm the only one, but this kind of went off for me. When I think about speaking in tongues, I think about maybe as a concept. This is something that people did as a concept in the past. Maybe this is what I do as I'm a translator. Maybe I could do some of this, and I don't think of it in the sense of what was actually happening and how amazing that was. As somebody who did study a language and learned it second, like, it's years of practice and effort and countless mistakes and embarrassments and humiliations and all the other things, the adventures, all that packed in, and you think you didn't have to do anything and you could jump straight to the thing just instantaneously. That's remarkable. That is that's why it's called a miracle, right? It's miraculous. But he says here, all that miraculous stuff is pointless. It's worthless talent if you don't have love. Whether it's angels or humans. If you think, okay, let's say he is talking about angels, the tongues of angels. Maybe Steve will get into that next week, where maybe this is the thing that people are speaking angelic tongues. I don't know. I don't know what that would even mean. I don't know anything about how that works or would work or anything like that. But even if it's true, how cool would that be? How awesome would that be? And he says it's pointless if you don't have love. You can't make that. I would think, okay, well, that's probably made his point strong enough. But he continues on. He says, and if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, we'll stop right there. Prophetic powers. Anybody feel like a prophet sometimes when they say, oh, I know what's going to happen, and it does, right? And prophecy, right, is a multi-layered thing. It's multi-layered discipline in this. It's not just being able to tell the future. Our HR representative reads palms. I think it's a little bit creepy, but she reads palms, and she'd evidently done a palm reading for one of my coworkers, and she's trying to tell the future, right? And you kind of want to believe that in some way. Maybe like there's some way of knowing, because the future is a bit scary, isn't it? What's the image? Anytime you're talking about the future, it's like you're walking backwards into it. You can only see what came before. You have no idea what's coming ahead. And a lot of us like control. We want to control our situation, and we want to look ahead and know this is what's going to happen. This is what's down the road, isn't it? Isn't that what we do? That would be a tremendously useful thing to know, to be sure of, a prophetic power. Or to be able to elucidate what the Scripture says and know the will of God through what it says. That would be an excellent thing too, to not be wrong. He says right here, understand all mysteries. And here's where I get my problems come in. A little self-confession time. I want comprehension as much as anything. To me, that is, I want to understand. You look at whatever some sort of craziness is going on, and I got to understand why this is the way it is. And that can lead me down a whole bunch of rabbit holes, and it does. Or if it leads me to a lot of conversation. I want to know why somebody's doing what they're doing. I got to know. I got to know. Comprehension I value probably more than a lot of things. What Paul steps on my toes here, he says, even if you understand all the things yet to be revealed, all the mysteries, even if you have all the knowledge and the truth that you can have, guess what? No love, nothing. You might as well not. You miss the boat, right? All mysteries and all knowledge. Paul had a lot more knowledge and a lot more understanding than I'll ever have about any of these things, right? And he says, don't have it. It's nothing. What about faith, though? Faith surely is a great thing. He says at the end of it, he says faith, is faith, hope, and love, right? These things remain. Faith, hope, and love, right? These things. It's good. How are we saved? By grace through faith, right? Faith is a critical part of what we do. But what does he say? To remove mountains. Jesus talked about a mustard seed of faith will remove mountains. Like you get that, just the smallest amount, you can do enormous things. How many times did Jesus say, oh, ye of little faith, right? You got all the faith that you can have right now. Paul's setting this up. You got all kinds of faith, right? But you don't have love? Nothing. Nothing. And, well, I'm going to go on to 3. If I give away all my possessions. Okay, I think about this with the rich young ruler, right? We read about him the other day in small group. And you got everything. It takes a lot, right? Most of us do not give up all of our possessions for something. We're not going to, right? That's just not, it's not even on the table. But imagine if you did. You gave it all up. And you renounced all of those things. I remember reading about some of the first monks in the year about 300-400 AD. They came from nobility, a lot of them. And one of the things that really brought up, I think it was Martin, for one, that really made them famous in the early church is that they gave up. They renounced all their titles, all the money they had, and they went and lived in some shacks by a river. And that's where they prayed. Those are the first monasteries. They gave it all up. And there's something about that, you're like, okay. You've got that faith right there that's removing mountains. You've got this. You're giving it all up. But what does Paul say? If you don't love, pointless. It's nothing. I gain nothing. What about handing over your body? Who isn't moved by the story of a martyr? Can you be martyred and not have loved? Probably. I imagine so. Right? Giving up your body to be abused or to be persecuted or whatever, you think, surely if I give that up, I've given everything, I've got something to boast about. Right? I've given up this. Paul himself talks about the stripes on his back. We've suffered with Jesus, and this is a big thing, but what does he say? Even if you go through all that, but you don't love, you gain nothing. So, all of those things, I would argue, are essential to Christian walks, right? We would quibble on tongues, right? That's just well, even that though. I mean, we've got to have people in the church, right, who do Bible translations, who do work with other people to spread the gospel. That's essential, right? Being able to rightly divide the word of truth, to be able to bring out what God wants, to listen to what His guidance is. That's essential for a Christian. Understanding as much as we can. That's essential. Having faith is essential. Giving, being generous, sacrificially generous is essential. Being willing to suffer for persecution for Christ's sake is essential. But all of those things are just worthless if we don't have love. It seems like cliche sometimes when I talk about these or I think about this. Like, yeah, all you need is love. And, like, oh, that's super simple. Give me the meat of something. Like I would say, oh, that's just, easy. Give me the theology behind it, or give me the scripture or whatever. Let's dive into the real meat of it. That's sort of the way I might have used to look at it. It's just you're boiling it down to say you just need to love. That's too simple. But it's not, is it? It's not simple at all when you try to work all that out. And I think part of what might go on here is that our time and place, our society and culture is bereft, really, of what love is, isn't it? Like we don't get it. How many different words? I can't remember. Is it 5 words for love or something to that? 4 in the Greek, right? They got all these little nuances that you can throw out there, and you can kind of comprehend that somewhat, maybe conceptually. But that's not at all how we think about it, is it? It's rather flippant, or we use it sarcastically, or we've got all kinds of different ways to talk about love and think about love. For us, love is primarily, I think, the most prioritized love is romantic love. Would you agree? Most every single song we listen to on my random time capsule playlist on the way up here was a love song. But it wasn't Paul love, was it? It wasn't. It was, there might be some of that packed in there. I didn't pay that close attention. But mostly, the love song, romantic love is the highest calling of love, right? If you get along really well with somebody, then ultimately what you say, well, you're probably going to have to consider a romantic relationship with that person at least, because that's really the pinnacle of everything. But I think what Paul's saying here is, no, that's not the case. Anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent. Do we have any thoughts that you want to share about this first paragraph? Yes?
The word charity is the old word for this.
Yes.
I think the beauty of the word charity is it doesn't carry with it so much the emotion as it does the quality of love. And to have charity towards someone is not really necessarily the same thing as to have that affection. I think Jesus had charity on the cross. And he was not necessarily feeling that deep affection for those who were killing him, but he was showing love for those who were killing him. And that there's something about this sacrificial quality of God's nature that he'll define in the rest of the chapter. But really, having that is the foundation of everything else that we have for walking with Christ.
Amen. The old word charity, which I guess, I don't know, to me it conjures up its own images and its own things these days, what charity is. Nobody, I don't want to be a charity case, right? That kind of thing. We're all a charity case. I mean, that's sort of anyway, that's another tangent that I would love to explore. But I think that's a really good point. And let's think about this in the context of coming off the heels of chapter 12, right? Where we're talking now about, it's one thing for me to put that in how Beth Dowling and I are interacting and all these kinds of things, or how I am personally. How does that mean? What does all of this mean for Signal Mountain Church of Christ, our group here? What does all of that mean? That even if as a group we have lots of faith, we have lots of talents, we have lots of even to the point that we're willing to carry our cross and endure persecution. What does it mean as a group if we're that way and we still don't have love within this group? That's something to ponder, I guess you could say. Let's look at the next, because so the question is, right, we talked a little bit around what the what does it mean to love, right? And he's going to give us a definition of it here. And the best way, I guess, to give it is to describe it. And so he's going to give a description of what this is. What is love? Because if it's this essential to everything, that everything else that we know is valuable in a walk following Christ becomes pointless if you don't have it. We need to get this right. We need to get this part right. So verse 4, love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of wrongdoing. So Paul launches into this poem right in the middle of it, which, I wish I could write a decent poem. A little bit of a poem would be nice. Something that's not just completely inane and silly. And he just launches into it. And I can kind of just imagine this is the way I imagine it. He's on this roll, right? You can almost feel in that first part where he's almost pleading. He's really making the case with these brothers and sisters that are squabbling and fussing and fighting over these things. He's really making this case about how important it is. And then he launches into this poem, which apparently in the original language is a beautiful thing with lots of alliteration and all that kind of stuff. But love is patient. So it occurs to me in this section that everything he describes is sort of like rubbish to the world. Right? Do we really value patience in the world at large? Yeah, well, maybe, but we have a lot of need for even some of that, Yeah, we need instant gratification, right? And if I'm not instantly great at things, or if I mess up, I'm like, just worthless at this, right? Something goes wrong. I've got a bazillion examples I could give of that. Anytime I try to fix anything remotely around the house, like it's going to take days, where it takes most people like 30 minutes. And every time you beat yourself up, you're like, this is just worthless, and you just feel awful. Like we want that instant ability. We're not patient with other people. We're not patient with ourselves. But I explain what they're supposed to be doing at work. I explain this process. How much more do I need to do? Right? I told them. Right? That's it. I put it in an email, for Pete's sake. Isn't that enough? Love is patient. We're not patient. The world doesn't value patience, really. But yet it's supposed to be a key descriptor. This is where he starts. This is the first place he starts with. He talks about this group of family that is the church at Signal Mountain, right? Or down the mountain, wherever you may be, if you're in the online world, right? That you're patient with each other. You're patient with yourself. You're patient. Somebody throw out something that you thoughts about patience. Anybody want to talk about that? Yes, sir.
It takes patience to cook beans.
Takes patience to cook beans.
And most other things, if you work with frog graders, it takes a while.
Yeah.
You need to kind of plan things out.
Okay. Culinarily, you've got to have some patience, right? And that's true. We're all sort of raw ingredients, aren't we? Kind of. It's taking a lot. God is patient and long-suffering, right? And unfortunately, his timeline is like decades, centuries, millennia, right? And we're like quite literally the breath of, the vapor on a cold day. Yeah.
Think about how you learn Spanish.
Yeah.
You and Rachel went to class together in college.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And learning Spanish, I was down there later, El Salvador, listening as hard as I could, trying to find words that I comprehend, and just listen to it. But after being there for a week, some things began to click a little bit.
Yep.
A little bit. If it was in the same environment where they use the same kind of language over and over. And I thought about how you guys have been speaking of the language and taking the time and the effort and the patience.
Patience. It does say patience to get there. Yeah, patience is key. That's a good point. It takes a bunch of years. It takes a bunch of years and a lot of mistakes. We gotta love that. Yes, ma'am.
I think there's a word that's come out here that I think this kind of charity and love involves having empathy for somebody else. What they're going through.
Yeah.
Their situation.
I agree. Empathy, I think, is going to be. I suspect it's hard to be patient if you don't have empathy, right? If you can't put yourself in somebody's shoes to figure something out, like if you can't relate to that, you haven't experienced anything like that or see it in yourself, the amount of patience you're going to have with each other is decreased. That's what I think. Now, I also think, I might be wrong, that probably some of us have better talents at developing empathy than others. With all of these things, some people are just endlessly patient. I know a lady by the name of Whitney Whittle. She teaches 2-year-olds, and I'm telling you, she is the most patient person I have ever seen. It doesn't matter what kind of circus is going on in there. She is just cool, calm, and collected. She's just going to handle it, and she's just got a smile on her face. It's just remarkable, that kind of patience. I would have pulled my hair out immediately. Ryan, did you have another?
Yes. Empathy is something I regard as a talent, much like these gifts. And as Paul said, without love, a gift is meaningless.
Yeah.
A number of people use empathy to get into people's skulls and manipulate them.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a dark side to that. And
yeah.
Also, you said understanding where a person is coming from. That can help in patience, but the thing is, Jesus was patient with people who were being inexcusably evil.
Yeah. Well, I think it was on Wednesday night, the point was brought up that Judas had been stealing from the sort of the disciples' treasury, and he's still hanging out with Jesus. Right? He's still at that last meal. I mean, I would give everything to be at that last meal. Wouldn't you? Like to be one of those that's sitting with Jesus before the biggest moment in the history of creation. You're there. And who's in there? Judas. He's breaking bread with Jesus is patient, which kind of gets to the point. I'm going to jump ahead of the no, I'm not. I'm going to stay on task. This next thing. I'm going to be patient. You be patient, I'll be patient. Okay. Love is kind. Ooh. Do we value kindness? What is kindness? Is kindness just being polite? I don't think kindness is just being polite. I don't. Maybe there's another way of looking at that. Kindness. Does anybody disagree with the fact that our community and world is less kind than it used to be? It's not less kind than, there are periods you could clearly look at and find out, well, that's way less kind. There's no kindness in that at all. People getting butchered for whatever reason there's all kinds of places that are worse. But if you just look at just general kindness as a virtue that we want to develop, it's sort of rubbish, isn't it, by the world's standards? We want effective, not kindness. Kindness isn't effective. We want effectiveness. And sometimes it is true. Being mean or rude or harsh is more effective. It is. But God doesn't call us to effectiveness. He calls us to faithfulness, doesn't he? Yes, Karina first, then Heath.
I was just going to say, maybe it's like kindness with customer service in general. Like, I remember growing up going to Walmart, and there's a greeter, and then there's a sticker, or going to Lowe's even. You're like, hey, I need to find the thing. And now it's like you have to hunt somebody down if they see you.
Yeah. You got to go to the kiosk. Just punch it in over there. There was my boss was complaining the other day. She'd gone to McDonald's on Brandon Road. This is nothing against Brandon Road McDonald's, but whatever. And her burger was like half cooked, and so she took it back. And she's like, "This isn't good." And he's like, "Oh, I'll reimburse you the cost of the burger." She's like, what about the whole meal? Like, about the whole meal. Like, the idea is, right? Yeah, but you ate some of the fries. So I'm not giving you money back for that. Like, she was hot. Like it's unfathomable. It makes perfect sense to me. But that's just not how things are. That's not the way it should be. Heath, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just want to make a comment that the world and people who are not Christians and have the faith that we have, they reading through this, and these are ideas.
Mm-hmm.
This is a theology, this is an idea. And I like Lorena's point, customer service at Walmart.
Yeah.
That's not an idea, it's not a theology, it's an action.
It is an action.
These words are action words.
Yes.
And if you don't show action, then you're missing out.
You're missing the point. Is it fair to say, based on these scriptures, that like if he says all these things, love, if you got love, and then he said this is how love behaves. So if you aren't, as a rule, a kind and patient person, do you have love? Is that a connection you can draw? I think so. Now, I personally want to get back to the kindness that Jesus showed when he calls people hypocrites. He turns those tables over. Oh, yeah. That's the love I want to have, right? Yeah, go ahead, Shay.
For the purposes of what we're talking about, can you define kindness?
You know, I thought about that too, because that's probably deceptively simple. I think kindness is probably one of those things that you have to think about. Is it kind to, let's say I've got something in my teeth from lunch. And if Corey says, hey, you got a big blob of spinach right there, how's that going to make me feel? Mortified, probably, because Corey's seen me with a blob of spinach in my teeth. But is it kinder for her to say something so that when I go talk to somebody else, I mean, it probably gets tricky. It probably gets tricky. It is definitely worth thinking of. Yeah.
I was looking through other translations of it, and one of the things amplifies is kind and thoughtful.
Thoughtful.
Kindness is maybe also, or broader, is being thoughtful about the other person or the other situation.
Yeah. Being thoughtful, and that thoughtfulness is really helpful. Yes, ma'am?
Think about Melanie, as Scarlett Fairwood saying, Lynn.
Okay.
Melanie, she was kind. She always thought of the person, she thought the best of them.
Yeah.
She's kind.
That's kindness.
A simple little act. Her whole being, she
Yeah.
thought the best in Scarlett, all of them.
It's
I think when a person is kind, that's
it's definitely not just like being polite. Like you think about somebody's kind, they just use nice words, they say please and thank you. That's really not. I don't think what kindness is. I think it's deeper than that. Okay.
The definition that I saw was that to show oneself mild.
To show oneself mild.
Learning, the Greek word is, it means to show itself mild, to be kind, to be, use kindness. It's also to show itself useful, to act benevolently.
Okay.
Kindness is to act benevolently. There's a proverb that says, let a friend strike me, it is a kindness. What it's talking about is, if I'm going the wrong way, somebody can turn me around,
Mhm.
they gotta do me, to be kind toward me to do so. It's,
Yeah.
if he really has a benevolent sense that I won't profess to you, sometimes a spanking is the kindest thing you do for a child. If you don't, you actually set them up for much worse. So kindness has something to do with it. It's not always gentle,
Yeah.
but it is always good and benevolent toward the best.
So the one thing that I then listen to that in the couple things I pick out, the proverb because said a friend, and then you mentioned a parent and a child. All of those things involve close relationship. I don't think me smacking somebody that I don't have a relationship is probably ever going to be kind, right? So you've got to have, it's got to be, and me calling Brent out on social media for his, ridiculous ideas is probably not going to be kind if I don't have a relationship with Brent, right? Probably not kind anyway, right? Brent doesn't have social media, so that's not the case. Okay, that's why I chose Brent.
The problem I see, Mark, is kindness as a character trait. Our society has evolved to the point where that is a weakness.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It is weak if you are showing kindness. Mild. You don't want mild. That was the key word there. You don't want that. That's it's not effective. It's not strong. Yes, Bill.
I hate to play devil's advocate
Please do, though.
You can love somebody and not be kind.
Well,
And I'll give you a good example.
okay.
When Jesus went to pray in the garden, he came back and the disciples were asleep. Was he kind to them?
He wasn't polite.
He loved them. But and I don't think that was a episode really kind.
Okay. Well,
But you wouldn't say that Jesus wasn't kind.
no, I wouldn't say that at all.
It depends on the situation. Could you really define kindness? You know, if you're kind in one situation, you can't be kind in another. I mean, if you're kind, you're kind.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is an issue of like sort of singular instances in which we know Jesus didn't make mistakes, right? So it must have been the right thing in that particular instance. I also know that I'm not Jesus. And I would love to continue with kindness because there's a lot there, but we've got some other things here to cover. Yes, sir. It is hard to love somebody who doesn't love you back. That's where Jesus really raises the bar when he talks about loving your enemies. Woo! Yeah, it's disturbing how much you guys keep bringing up beating people for kindness. Don't go to the dances with a problem. They're going to be... Maybe. I mean, I wouldn't just tweak that, being modern and young. I would say boundaries. Like boundaries and discipline, it can be very kind, right? Okay, I really do have to move along. Not envious, right? It's not envious. He's going to switch and define it in a negative way. Here's what it's not. It's not envious. So, is that fairly self-explanatory? Maybe it is. It's not boastful or arrogant. We like boastfulness in our culture right now, don't we? We like to boast about how awesome we are, or whatever the case is. That is how you get ahead. A lot of times we're doing interviews and we got resumes, and I'm 95% sure that a lot of what's in there is not even true. Or at minimum, it's heavily inflated and like it's boasting because you want to give your best, make first impressions that are really good, right? That's not it. Arrogance to me is that sense that I can look at whatever situation from the outside with about 5 minutes of conversation hearing about it and say, I know what that is. Here's what it is. Here's how you fix that, right? There's a lot there, and I can't believe that's the bell. That is really unfortunate.
As long as you have someone's best interest in mind, I would still define that as kindness.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about kindness is putting some, but it's also I'm going to accept that for sure. But look what he says in this last one, or rude. I like that, right? Because sometimes we think it's, oh, well, I'm truthful about this. They're lazy, and I just need to tell them they're lazy, right? And rudeness is the currency of today, it seems to me. I might be wrong, but it seems to me that rudeness is the currency of the day. Our conversations and the way we feel it's okay to behave, the way we want to correct somebody or whatever, it's okay to be rude. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but if Paul's defining how love behaves and rudeness is a characteristic of my life, I probably am not loving, right? If I'm arrogant and I'm boastful, and if I'm insisting on my own way, of course, I would never see that. I would never see myself as insisting on my way. That's something everybody else does, right? If I'm super irritable all the time, probably not loving. Okay, now I know there's more here, and we didn't even get to the other interesting bits, but I do want to leave this out here as a challenge. If love is that critical, is what Paul's saying and what Jesus says about being the foundation of the law and the prophets, we need to make sure we have it right. So my suggestion for sort of an application is spend some time in prayer with these verses and try to think of a way that Jesus exemplified these things. Jesus spent a lot of time railing on some Pharisees, didn't he? But he also spent days in conversation with them. He broke bread with them. They were at the house, right? He spent time with sinners and tax collectors. There must have been some kindness in that, right? So think about how Jesus did. Then in prayer, think about how you are reflectively. And don't use this as a moment. Don't use this as a moment to put yourself on a heavy guilt trip. Because the truth of the matter is, you ain't living up to it. None of us are, right? So don't use it to try to make yourself feel guilty. Use it instead to try to see what you need to develop. And then also in that moment of prayer, maybe the upper room would be a good place for this. In that moment of prayer, think about the things that you do well. Maybe you are kind, more so than other people. Maybe that's not your thing. So not to become arrogant and boastful. Oh yeah, I got this all sorted out. I move along to the next thing. Like, just really think about it, because the truth is that all of us do some of this well, and all of us do some of this poorly. On some days we're doing better than others, and some situations, and it's complicated, and only God knows, and ultimately it's not going to be what saves us anyway. It's going to be God's grace, but we want to try to practice living for the new world, which gets to the part that I'm not going to get a chance to talk to about, but let's talk real quick here about love never ending, okay? There was a lot of conversation back when I was a kid growing up, trying to figure out what the complete was and the partial and end and seeing dimly through a glass and all that. I can throw here what I think. And I think Paul is saying that in the full kingdom, in the new heavens and new earth that Paul talks about in Romans and talks about later in Ephesians, when all things are brought into Christ, all of those things, this is what we're practicing for now. We live this way now, not perfectly. We're living this way because we are anticipating how it's going to be. That's what faith is. And that's how we want to live. And he says here, and why is it that love is the one that lasts? I'm going to quote an old hymn here. Because he says in the last verse now, faith, hope, and love remain, these three, and the greatest is love. Why? Why in the new world will love be the one that remains? This old hymn puts it like this. Faith will vanish into sight. Hope be emptied into light. Love in heaven will shine more bright. Right? Well, that's maybe worth one more time. Faith will vanish into sight. Hope be emptied into light. Love in heaven will shine more bright. And that is where I want us to leave. So we've got something to take home to try, to prayerfully meditate on how we're supposed to be and what love is. And I love the conversation, and I wish we could have more time to dig into all of these things. There are some irritable people in here, and I wanted to really rake you over the coals about that because I'm being kind in doing so, right? So anyway, all joking aside, the bearing all things, believing all things, hoping all things, enduring all things, those are beautiful things, right? So let's end with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for your mercy and your love. Your love, Father, is the example for us. We see that in Christ, and we see Paul describing it here. May we make that part of ours, Lord. And as we contemplate and reflect upon your